Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, maybe. Welcome to this special session, which features a keynote address on demography, fast and slow. I'm Nico van Imwegen. I'm associated with the NIDI, the Demographic Institute of the Netherlands, but today here I'm your Secretary General of the IUSSP. And I warmly welcome you and thank you for joining this session, which was initiated and organized at the invitation of the International Organizing Committee for this conference. Our speaker of today hardly needs introduction. Francesco Billeri is a sociologist and a demographer. He's a professor of sociology at the Department of Social and Political Sciences and the Carlo Dondena Center for Research on Social Dynamics and Public Policy, all at Bocconi University in Milan, Italy. Francesco's research interests are broad, and they include, among others, family, life course, policy, social statistics, digital demography, just to mention a few. He also has many honors, and of course, I have to mention just one. He is honorary president of the European Association for Population Studies, EAPS. But in IUSSP, we know him also as the co-chair of our, together with Emilio Zagheni, of our scientific panel on digital demography. Okay, so today Francesco will talk about different speeds of demographic change, where he will argue that the well-known slow demography paradigm that emphasizes demographic inertia, predictability, and a very self-contained view of population dynamics, mostly focusing on fertility and mortality, that paradigm should be supplemented with another paradigm because demography can also be fast. So let's see today how fast demography can be. So here are some household remarks. After the talk of Francesco, which will be about 30 minutes, we will have discussion. If you have questions for the discussion, just put them in the chat. And we will also have the raise hand function that we can join the discussion after the talk. So please do that. Okay, then, Francesco, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nico. It's a great privilege and honor to be here, and thank you also for chairing this session. Let me start sharing the screen, and I hope you can see. Okay. My slides. First of all, let me also thank the European Research Council for funding the research project in which this specific paper is embedded. So Nico already, and you also saw the conference program, already kind of alerted to what I'm gonna say, but I'll try to go back to this issue, and this is the structure of the talk. A short preface. I will discuss the idea of slow demography as the currently mainstream paradigm on the study of population change. Then I will move to introduce very simple measures of the speed of population change or the speed of demography, where it is possible to kind of get data for many countries thanks to recent reconstructions that have been carried by colleagues. I will then argue for the presence of fast demography, both looking at data at the global level and at two specific countries for which I happen to have good data and specific knowledge, that is Italy and Germany. And I will end up the talk with a discussion of the findings and some implications for both science, and this is a scientific conference for demographers, and also policy, and also science policy. Okay, the preface here, I will be talking about macro demographic change. And this is also a little bit of a small ad for the integrating view of population change, where macro and micro should play together, which I basically borrowed from sociology. I will talk about macro change, what I will call the stage 1 of the study of population change, the discovery stage. And I will try to convince you that we are discovering the speed of population change in a way that was not known before. Of course, this is only the first stage. I will not touch upon what I also love, which is the micro foundation of population change. This is for another part of the project. So let me introduce the idea of slow demography. What is the mainstream view of demographic change in terms of time scale? I think when we introduce demography, we tend to think about ideas such as inertia, especially if we are talking about current population change. We talk about the possibility to think about the long run, and we also tend to emphasize predictability. One of the central demographers of the 20th century, Paul Demeny, we know him for many research findings, but also for his influential direction of the Population and Development Review. He stated in a PDR review article, the near-term future in demographic matters may be defined as the next 5 to 20 years. So before 5 years, it's really the present. 5 to 20 is the near-term future. This idea, again, it's inertia, long run, predictability. This idea is basically what is behind what the UN does and other agencies emphasizing long-term demographic scenario. Let's say, roughly speaking, up to a century, 80 years, 60 years, a century. For a while, there was even a dream of going further. For instance, there was a meeting at UN talking about 2 centuries, which was not followed up, the world population to 2300. But let's say, if we think demography and we think long-term, we are normally thinking about decades. This is slow. Another way to see the slow demographic paradigm runs back to Sauvy, Alfred Sauvy, the founder of the INED in Paris. In his first treaty on population, he basically used the metaphor of a watch with 3 hands, one moving fast, the seconds, the other one moving a bit slower, the minutes, and the third one moving slowly, the hour hand. So for Sauvy, differently from politics and the economy, which move with the fast hands of seconds, politics, and this was before politicians tweet. So he had a vision of politics as a short-run idea. And then the economy moves with the minutes hand. Demography moves slowly with the hour hand. Yet the short hand of the watch, the demography hand, is the most important, even if it seems immobile. And the sentence continues, because in the end, it moves the day from day to night and so on. The long run, it is more important to think about the hour hand than about this kind of short-term hands. So a third feature of slow demography is also an inertial feature. It's something that we will define as exogenous to other factors. So we don't need to consider politics and economy or other factors when we think about population scenarios. Population scenarios, although they are informed by other determinants, they are normally built as self-contained. So demographic scenarios are basically pushed by demographic change. And they are exogenous in the sense that they are used as the basis on which scenarios are built on economic matters, on political matters, on societal matters, on cultural, for instance, religious change, on climate change. So demography provides the exogenous driver of all these changes. So inertial, predictable, we can think about the long run. There has been a clear scientific success of this low demography paradigm, the demographic transition, and also its implications on the age structure of population. So the idea that all countries go, some slow, some fast, but end up experiences a demographic transition is part of the successes of the slow demography paradigm, including the population aging that goes with the demographic transition. Massimo Livi Bacci, in the Concise History of World Population, his masterpiece, says that the demographic transition is a transition from waste to economy, from disorder to order, from high to low fertility. We can say from fast population change to slow population change, because in the old regime, societies were inefficient. We had high birth rate, high death rates, a lot of fuel, and a lot of waste. After the demographic transition, we have low birth rates, low death rates, and less waste, more economy. So this process is global at the level of the world, but it also at the level of all countries, and this is informing current paradigm. And it also implies some amount of convergence, which is used to inform current population scenarios, for instance, the UN scenarios that are informed by the demographic transition paradigm. So if we think that demography is low, maybe we should measure the speed of demographic change. And how fast is actually demographic change? Actually, we do not routinely measure the speed of population change, even if we have a very ready measure for demographic change. And this measure has been used in other frameworks, and it's called the population turnover rate. I will do the easy formal introduction. Turnover rates are used in ecology, in organizational demography, or in business administration, manpower, what used to be called manpower planning, but also in population geography, which is the closest to what we were going to do today. Surprisingly, turnover measures, so in terms of speed of change, are scarcely used in demography. So let's define the simple measure of population turnover rate. So population turnover rate is the sum of all rates in and out of a population. So instead of using the basic equation of population change with a plus for births, a minus for deaths, a plus for immigration, and a minus for emigration, if you want to measure the speed of population change, all flow measures, all rates in and out, have a positive sign. So the PTR is the sum of the crude birth rate, the crude death rate, the crude immigration rate, and the crude emigration rate. This is a basic measure of the speed of population change. Okay, point number one. What's happening to the speed of demographic change? Let's start with the famous idea of Malthus, 1798. To make the argument more general and less interrupted by the partial views of emigration, he was thinking only about emigration, let us take the whole Earth instead of one spot and suppose that the restraints to population were universally removed. So this is the first formulation of the closed population paradigm, which is a typical slow demography assumption. For instance, let's assume there is no immigration, no immigration. These rates are zero. Josh Goldstein at Berkeley, in this case, proved in a mathematical way that population turnover is minimized, so demography is the slowest, when population growth is negative. If there is no immigration, so Malthus, if there is no emigration as well, the population of the world, population turnover rate is just the sum of birth rate and death rate. Here we can measure the speed of demography, and we can see that it's declining over time with the progress of the demographic transition. I use the most recent UN data. World Population Prospect 2019. And if we just do P plus D at the world level, we go down from 56 per thousand in 1950-55 to the most recent estimates. We will see, okay, they are pre-COVID estimates of 26 per thousand. So indeed, at the global level, demography is getting slower. If we take the medium variant to the 2100 data, there is a basically plateau level in terms of speed of population change. And if we take the medium variant, it will be 23 per thousand by 2100. This is at the global level. So at the global level, demography is getting slower as predicted by the demographic transition paradigm. But at the country level, as Malthus was clear, we are not at the whole world. The no migration assumption is often misleading. It's particularly misleading when we think about the speed of demography. And here we need, we run into a problem. Usually, most data, including UN data, have net migration as a residual. And so we need to have estimates of migration flows to be combined with birth and death data to measure the PTR, to measure the speed of population change. Luckily, colleagues Guy Abel and Joe Cohen have published and updated in 21 estimates of bilateral migration flows for 200 countries, which then we could use to produce estimates of immigration crude rates and emigration crude rates, and then to produce estimates of population turnover rates for these countries. So the combination of UN data plus Abel and Cohen data allows to produce PTR and an additional measure. An additional measure is also the measure that tells us how much information we lose in terms of the speed of demography if we just focus on the overall part, or in particular, if we just focus on births and deaths. And this measure is the share of population turnover due to migration, or in short, the migration share of turnover. We can define it in two ways. Either we take the migration-related measure of turnover, immigration and emigration rates over population turnover, or we just take immigrants and emigrants, so not the rates, and divide it by the sum of all flows, so not the rates. So in the empirical part of this talk, I will just use population turnover rates and migration share of turnover. And again, we can do that because we can combine UN estimates with Abel Cohen estimates. So we can use this data only from 1990 to 2015-20. Of course, the estimates are pre-COVID-19, so the 2015-20 may be revised in the next round of WPP or other related data. Let's now look at what the results will look like. First of all, in this graph, each point is a country. So this is a frequency distribution. It's a box plot at the global level where each dot is one country. If we take the average country, the average population turnover rate is also down. So population is getting slower from about 53 per thousand to about 43 per thousand during this period, from 1990-95 to 2015-20. And you can see there is a huge dispersion in terms of population turnover rates, with some countries, especially in the first part, even above 100 per thousand, or 10%. Most countries are below 10%, but there is a huge variation. But let's say the average country is getting slower, as predicted by a demographic transition, slow demography paradigm. If we look at the other measure, the migration share of turnover, we get something that is a newer insight, I believe. The migration share of turnover, or let's say the part of population change in terms of speed of population change to migration, is getting up. And here we are looking at a percentage measure from, for the average country, about 28% to 32%, with a huge dispersion, basically from 0 to above 100%. So to above 80%. And a huge variation. So this is what we can see. Demography getting slower, but the share of migration getting higher. Can we say something more? Yes, we can look at specific countries, as I will do later, but we can also look at general relationships in the cross-section. The first relationship is with the size of a country. And here, the plot contrasts population turnover rate, the PTR, with population size of a country. And you are not basically India, our host here is to the right with China, and then you have the smaller countries to the left. You're not too surprised if we see that population turnover is higher in smaller countries in terms of total population. So on average, there is a negative, I will not say strongly negative, link between the size of a country in terms of population and its turnover rate. If we look at migration share of turnover, the relationship is stronger and it's getting stronger. So for smaller countries, the migration share of turnover is higher and tends to be above 50% after a certain threshold. And it tends to be close to 0, albeit with huge variation for bigger countries. No big surprise. And these are, again, relationships in the cross section. If we look at another relationship, which is standard in the demographic transition literature, the relationship between a demographic quantity and the Human Development Index as a summary indicator of the level of development in a country. If we look at 1995, we have a standard relationship, i.e. for countries with higher levels of Human Development Index, population turnover rates are lower. This relationship is getting flatter for 2010-15. We didn't have the data for 15-20. This flattening of the relationship is a little bit a surprise, and there is a lot of variation to the right hand of the HDI distribution. If we look at migration share of turnover, we are also getting some interesting associations in the cross-section. In particular, we see a relationship that is turning positive, i.e. for countries at the high end of the Human Development Index, there is a higher role of migration in shaping population change in terms of speed. Okay, so these are kind of some relationship. You can also, if you don't like the HEI, look at the GNI per capita. In the GNI per capita, which is a component of the HDI, there is one of the favorite things we look in the cross-section, which is a hockey stick relationship. So there is a turnaround at a high level of GNI, with the speed of population change getting accelerated when GNI gets above a certain level. And again, these are pure association and clear relationships when we look at the migration share of turnover. So what happens if we look at the longitudinal data? We could have some countries. This is, for instance, the basic data that we use combining UN and Abel-Cohen estimates. This is, for instance, one country, the United States, where you see the levels of population turnover getting slightly slower, but relatively constant at about 30 per 1,000, with a migration share of turnover which is about a third. Another country that is completely different is Qatar in the Gulf, where turnover is going up and down very quickly, around kind of 100 or even clearly above 100 per 1,000, with a migration share that is dominating the turnover. And if we took a country with high turnover, but for different reasons, for high birth rate and relatively high death rate, Nigeria, so the biggest country in Africa, the migration turnover, share of turnover is much smaller, but growing. So these are kind of the 5-year estimates. I could look, because of good data, at annual estimates for 2 European countries. Germany, which is a particular case, it's number 6 in the HCI, or I would say the largest population in the top 10 of the Human Development Index, with over 83 million inhabitants in 2020. It has had a political change and a clear attention towards demography, with sustained fertility decline, especially for East Germany during the 1990s. In 2015, refugee crisis, the Chancellor Angela Merkel refused to set an upper limit to the number of refugees Germany will accept. In 2020, COVID-19 comes in. What happens to German data, where the 2020 are estimates? So the PTR, the population turnover rate, is in blue. The migration share of turnover is a dash and white and black. What you see is a decline of population turnover rate until the mid-2000s, with a huge increase of the speed of population change. This increase of the speed of population change is also linked to the increase of the share of turnover due to migration, which is going constantly above 50%. So here we see the biggest, in terms of economy and population, Western European country, at least, showing an increase of the speed of population change, with this increase linked to migratory movements. Then I get to my own country, Italy. For Italy, it is possible to reconstruct over a century, with 2 world wars, pro-natalist policy of the fascist regime, a post-war baby boom, mortality declining over this period, a country passing from a country of emigration to a country of immigration, and immigration with what has been defined by Colombo and Dalla Zuanna, a laissez-faire policy. And then comes COVID-19, where Italy is the point of entry of COVID-19 in 2020 to the West. Here is the PTR in blue. The peak of PTR was after World War I, when Italy had a peak of emigration. Of course, there was also Spanish flu. The peak of Italy is not, is basically close to what Germany has now in terms of speed of population change. Then there is a long decline until the 1990s, where the speed of population change increases again, thanks to an increase in the migration share of turnover. What we see for 2020 is a decline in the speed of population change, and that's the same as in the German case, and it's mostly due to the decline of the migration share of turnover. I'm almost close to the end of my allotted time, so I'm getting to the discussion. So yes, demography is slow. However, once we actually measure the speed of population change, in particular at the country level, using migratory, so there's a two, migratory flow data, demography can also be fast and become faster. And this is including post-transitional societies. 2 issues here. Scale matters, faster demography for smaller countries, and for Europe, North America in particular. But also development matters, and demography may get faster if we believe that this J shape is something that tells us something about the future. But also, when there is a central role of migration, then demography gets faster in rich, advanced societies. If that's true, then demography is not only slow, demography is fast and slow. What are the implications for demography and population science in general? First implication is for demographic data collection. If we take seriously a fast and slow view of demography, we need more real-time, fast-paced data collection, which is, if we think about the watch metaphor, more in line with what we do with economics and politics than with the slow demographic idea of having a 10-year census. So we need more real-time demographic data. This was done. This was done with COVID-19, where for mortality, we even had daily data. And so everyone has caveats on 2020 data. We have opportunities with the digital revolution. So yesterday in this conference, we had a discussion on the digital demography panel. We had opportunities on nowcasting. We had opportunities for fast, open demographic data. So demographic data are faster rather than slower, if we accept this paradigm. First implication. Second implication that we saw today, we need to be more careful in terms of demographic theory to think about the scale. I mean, maybe it's basic idea, but a demographic theory for a country is different from a demographic theory for the world. The no migration assumption becomes increasingly more problematic when we look at smaller and wealthier countries, but also for poorer countries when we look at pre-transitional crisis, but for post-transitional refugees movement. So the no migration assumption may become increasingly more challenging for the future of demography. And the net migration is becoming a less useful concept. Migration experts have said that more than I can say now. But let's say net migration is as useful as growth rates without separating birth and death rates. So we really have to take flows into account. Another implication for science that I can tell to demographers is that maybe we are suffering from something that could be labeled as overconfidence. The longer term view of demography, especially at the national level, relies too much on the slow demography perspective. But slow demography has to be complemented with a fast demography perspective. Some demographers may even are guilty of sins looking at future scenarios as actual data, especially when making presentation to others. There are challenges on a huge uncertainty around migration, so this is very important for the future. And there are challenges when we say that demography can be used as a forecasting tool, as an exogenous input to other scenarios. So this kind of use of demography may be misplaced. It may be better to move to a situation in which we have joint scenarios, in which if economics and politics and other factors are moving, demography is basically moving together. One example in climate change research is the so-called shared socio-economic pathways. The last implication for demography is that the determinants of demographic change needs to be revised. A self-contained view of demographic change is perhaps beautiful and elegant from a mathematical perspective, but it's empirically wrong. We need to pay more attention on the macro and micro level determinants of shifts and sudden shifts, in particular on demographic change and their discontinuities, including economics and politics. Moreover, we need to look at the speed of change within the life course. In terms of policy, we have implications for science funding. We need more funding for frequent and fine-grained population data. And if we have trade-off, less funding for slow demographic data collection. We need more focus on migratory flows. We need more focus for the integration of data on demography and economics and politics, rather than having separate data collections. For institutions, fast demography is a reality. It's not something for the past, for before the demographic transition. Country level and supranational institutions seem to see demography as something slow, but they need to realize that it's also fast. The uncertainty surrounding population forecast should also be transferred in the political use of demographic forecasts. And in terms of population policies, may shift demography, sorry, not demographer, faster than usually thought. So the shorthand of the clock can be moved more frequently back and forth than we thought. And this is very important, for instance, for challenges like aging at the national level, where the replacement migration debate had for a while said the idea that it's impossible to control population aging at the national level. For Germany, it's clearly not the case. Migration is part of the mix, not only fertility and survival. If you are interested, the paper is forthcoming in Population and Development Review. And I'm looking forward for your comments and discussion. Thanks a lot for your attention. I'd like to thank Luca Badolato, who was crucial in working with data and the beautiful graphs.
Thank you, Francesco, very much for a very fascinating talk and taking the broad view in a conference where we have lots and lots of sessions on very detailed topics and very good research. This is the broader view where you started with some of the older pillars of demography and bringing us to lots of thinking about the slow and the fast and the implications for data and theory, the overconfident demographer, and many more challenging things. So I think there's lots of food for thought, and the discussion will be open now. The audience did not have a lot of time due to your talk to type in their questions. So we'll see what the live discussion will bring. So if you want to share your thoughts and comments on this talk by Francesco, please raise your hand, and you can still use the chat too. And before I don't see on my screen people showing their hands. Francesco said, for the smaller country, the speed of change, the turnover rate is faster than for the bigger one, which is kind of self-explanatory. But I think this could also. It also means that if you would look at the subnational level, that the speed would even increase. You would go to like Formula One demography. Is that something that you are going to consider in your studies?
Yeah, thank you, Nico. Definitely, yes. This has already been done by Stilwell and others within UK. In line with a kind of urban sociology or urban change idea, where the speed of population change, for instance, in a neighborhood is a matter that is relevant for understanding social cohesion and other factors. But definitely, yes. So the point there is, again, an idea in which it is possible to have data not only on births and deaths, but also on population flows. And if we believe seriously that this matter is central, we need to invest more into that. But definitely, if we probably had even India and China in a disaggregated way, like my friend Chris Wilson used to advocate also for kind of a global level demography, then we will probably see kind of faster change in some of these countries, in particular when looking at the urban-rural divide. And it's something that, of course, will be on the agenda to be done.
Okay. We're still waiting for some comments from the floor. Please do raise your hand when you want the discussion. Something that struck me also was the concept of the overconfident demographer. This morning we had a session on demographic training, and there was a lot of concern in some parts, some people in the panel, that demography would be taken over by other disciplines, that the voice of demography would not be heard very well, and that we should focus our training more on that. This is a bit of a different story than the overconfident demographer that you see looming around on the horizon.
Okay, I have two kind of comments. One is not training in other disciplines because we are afraid that other disciplines will take you over may be a crucial mistake in terms of strategy. That will be my first point. Linked to that, in terms of jobs, even if in some institutions it is possible to be a pure demographer, in many jobs it is important to have two identities. So this is kind of a strategic demography thinking for demographers. Or you could say, know your enemy, rather than say we only train among ourselves and we talk among ourselves because we are afraid that economists will take us over. Then we don't even realize when they take us over. This is number one, and I love economists. I have a degree in economics. So, but the second point is more substantive. If we are in love with our beautiful self-contained models, and we tend to say we ignore politics and the economy as a source of demographic change, we make a scientific mistake. So that's much worse than the strategic idea I discussed before. So we can have beautiful self-contained views of population change that are empirically wrong. Do we want that? I don't think so.
Okay, thank you. See Susanna Kavanaghi. You want to come in, Susanna?
Yes, thank you very much for a fascinating topic and food for thought, because when you were talking about, I was thinking, well, we need to look at other slow and fast transformation. You're saying about population and the total population, in the growth of population and migration. And I was thinking about the change in age structure. And when we think about the speed of age structure, when we look at aging, and I was thinking about the video that the Demographers United saying that aging is an important topic. And I was thinking it's even more important in places where fertility went down so fast, because aging is going to be in a very fast speed. So I would like to ask you if you have thought about calculating other indicators. I was just thinking, I have done some calculation, how long takes from you go from 7% of people 60 or 60 and over to 14% to 21%. So increase 7%. It's just amazing how some countries are going to take only 20 years to get from very small portion of aging to, and if you include politics going fast and economic going fast there, and messy economic and politics also. So this makes this whole idea of global theory not working is even more when you take those indicators. So can you comment on having calculate another indicators for slow and fast?
Okay, before you answer to that one, Francesco, I have another question by David Lamb. David, would you like to come in?
Sure, yeah. Well, mine's kind of related to Susanna's point. I was just, as a very fascinating presentation. Thank you. Really, lots to think about. Really, really good points. I was just thinking as you were talking about all of these components, and I guess if you think about your this population turnover rate, it's kind of only looking at like people coming and going, and sort of as if we're only interested in like the total number and how much is the total number changing. And we got people coming and people going and people dying and people being born. But of course, we really care about other components, the details of the demography, and Susanna's point about age structure was one I was going to mention as an obvious one. And of course, mortality and fertility are very different in terms of how they affect different things we might be interested in, like the age structure, like the size of the labor force, and so on. They also differ a lot in terms of their sort of how easy they are to predict. So, or what impact they're going to have. So fertility, if you said, what if you change fertility? What's it going to do to the population? Well, it's going to, it's going to produce babies. So, you can kind of run with that. It's not going to affect the labor force for 15 or 20 years, depending on how you think of labor force. Mortality, it's like, well, give me more detail. Who's, where are the death changes happening? And of course, with something like HIV/AIDS, we can get very fast demography in a way that we never, we don't usually think of mortality doing, but of course, we've always had mortality crises like that, and they're often very age specific. So the point is just, I think, in many ways, it's just kind of taking your point and making it further of, if you want to talk about how demography is changing, and is it changing fast or slow, mortality is very different than fertility. The ability to predict it is very different from mortality or fertility. And then migration, of course, you make the very good point that that can change very fast, and immigration and immigration can be very different, and they have tend to have very specific and somewhat generalizable age profiles. So I guess the point is, if we really think of the details of what it is why we're interested in the demography, the total number is actually not very interesting usually. It's really sort of specific components. And in that case, you really have to break the whole thing apart into all the different rates. But thank you, very provocative comments. I really enjoyed it.
So Francesco, go beyond the numbers.
Thank you. Thank you. I think both questions and comments are so related, so I will answer to both of them. And thank you. All points are well taken, David and Susanna. I mean, I could say, we start from the easy thing, which is total numbers. No, but I think it's not a fair answer. I mean, first of all, the easy things tell us something that is also a bit unexpected. So that's why I thought it was worth stopping here at this stage. But I agree with both of you. I mean, of course, the world is not over, and there are at least two issues. One is the replacement migration debate, where the link with population aging, I mean, I think I alluded to that. And the issue is, as David said, okay, the babies can only enter at age 0. So if you want to change a population at age 20, there is no way you're gonna have babies if not in 20 years. I mean, we know this is very basic demography. So the replacement migration concept has to be thought in terms of this various speed. I think when we use models like stable population to think about replacement migration, we make an empirical mistake and a logical mistake, because we don't take into account that replacement migration is a non-equilibrium concept. There is something that we have to fix in the next 5 to 20 years, which was the near demographic term for Paul, which cannot be fixed by changing birth rates. But then the second point is methodologically more also interesting, which is, okay, can we think about the speed of change for different ages? And of course, with the speed of change for ages over 0, then the point is, to what extent is mortality suddenly changing? And I'm afraid also here, I used to teach in Italy, in Lombardy, something that was derived from the slow demographic paradigm, saying, okay, epidemics are something from the past. These dips in life expectancy of years are something from the past. Then I sit 50 kilometers from the province of Bergamo, where estimates of life expectancy for a province which is million plus people are to the levels of, and now we'll see the final estimates, but possibly 3-4 years for one single province for COVID. So in a sense, the speed of change for specific ages has been dramatic, also in terms of aging in parts of this country. And so it is something that we definitely plan to do. It's an obvious extension looking at the components of demographic change by age, but then it is even more difficult to think about data, although David alluded, okay, we can maybe use some models to put immigration and immigration by age. But yes, the point is well taken. We don't only, I would say to David, we don't only care about total numbers, but still we have to think about total numbers.
Right. We have a question from Clementine. Clementine, would you like to come in?
Yes, I had when I was listening to your talk, I was thinking about the case of Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, where very fast migration flows from rural areas are permanently refreshing the population. And we are at the moment investigating whether this could not perhaps be explained why fertility rates are especially slow there. I mean, they're not decreasing further, they're stagnating at a rather high level for an urban place. And so that way, what do you think about this connection between can fast demography create slow demography? How would you frame this with your framework?
Before you answer that one, Francesco, I have one in the chat from Gabriela Mejia Pai. Excellent talk. Any thoughts on how fast demography will have to go given climate change? So keep that in mind. And then Jalal, would you like to come in and add your question, and then we give Francesco time to react. Jalal.
Sure, Francesco, it was a fascinating talk. I have your paper in front of me, 2015 paper on integrating macro and micro approach in demography, where you alluded us actually in this presentation also to the figure that you showed, that you said that we are in the discovery part, but in your paper you talk about the explanatory part, that you argue that demographers should be involved in a micro approach actually, and then you talk about different modeling and from bottom to sort of up approach, which is very micro approach in demography. This is IUSSP session, and I'm wondering whether you want to make any comment on training of a new generation of demographers, that you are now talking about mainly macro approach here, but what about the implications for micro approach in demography and training in demography for the new generation of demographers? Thank you.
Okay, Francesco.
Thank
up
you.
to you.
I will try to be creative and put the three questions together in a flow. Maybe let me start from Jalal's point, and thank you, by the way, for these wonderful comments and questions. On training, I think, yeah, it is a 2015 paper making a bit this argument. On training, demography should not abandon its tradition of not being afraid of thinking macro level, something that in other disciplines is considered as descriptive. Okay, what I showed today is basically description. So the caveat in that paper was to say that, okay, not all description is an advance in scientific term, it has to be a discovery. And discoveries can be at the macro level. I think in that sense, demography has a potential advantage in the social science. It's less in the natural and biological sciences, where description is part of science. For some reason, political science, economics, maybe a bit less sociology, use the word descriptive as a bad word. In that sense, I'm tied to my former employer, the Max Planck Institute for Demographic Research, where the idea of descriptive findings was promoted as part of science. And I think for training, we should keep on defending the right to describe, with a caveat. The caveat is that not all description is progress. So we have to be precise, only something that gives us new insight on population change. And then the point is explanation goes to the micro level. And this leads me to the two questions of Clementine and Gabriela. So, I mean, Clementine, fantastic point, is are people having fewer kids because of the migratory movements in, for instance, sub-Saharan African setting? Yes, it's clearly a plausible idea, actually an empirically testable hypothesis. If we have measures of speed of population change, we could use these measures to see how they related to behavior, for instance, with a kind of a multi-level approach. So I think historically cities, even in all the pre-transitional Europe, were low fertility areas replenished by migration. How causal was the link or is the link? It's something that I haven't seen many investigation and will require going to the micro level of decisions, whether people are aware of this. For instance, are they aware of the speed of population change? Possibly yes, because that's what you see around yourself. And Gabriela's question on climate change. Oh, here there is a link to a literature which is, okay, climate crisis or disasters. So fast change may be induced by disasters, but also disasters may induce a slow change because of a situation in which after a crisis, then basically nothing happens and a situation is abandoned. What basically the climate change or, let's say, local disaster ideas are telling us is, again, that demographers should be less overconfident. Demography is not only the input to climate change scenarios, but climate change can, as the experts know, lead to demographic change. And so it's increasingly more difficult to think as demographers to think that we are self-contained. Unfortunately, we also need to learn a bit about climate change and their impact on population change.
Thank you very much, Francesco. When I don't see any more questions in the chat or or any raised hands, when we in the organizing committee thought about these keynote sessions, we thought that in a time where there is lots of Zoom and lots of webinars and seminars, it would also be good to have shorter sessions, more focused on one topic. And I think this session, which was a fascinating talk by you, Francesco, proved our point. We have lots of people participating in the session. Mind you, lots of others will see this session when they will view the recording. I think we are going to leave it at this. As Susanna already said, lots of food for thought, and this discussion will continue, absolutely. Thank you again for giving this presentation and accepting the invitation of the International Organizing Committee. And also thank you everybody for joining and taking part in the discussion. So remember, there will be a recording. You can see this later or share it with your students. Also would like to thank the interpreters for their work and the technical support from Open Water. And I wish you all a very good afternoon, morning, evening, night, but we are closing down this session. Thank you, and see you at other sessions of this great conference.
Thank you, Nico, and thanks everyone for this honor.